today we are going to be having quite a doozy of a talk. This is something that is very important to me, obviously, because I'm a dystopian author. However, it goes beyond that as well. Dystopian isn't just about books anymore, or even about authors. Now I would say, I'd have to say that even though most of the problem is 70% still attached to publishing, it has gone beyond that, and it has had ripple waves and just effects. So yeah, we're going to be talking about that. Before I get started, I should mention I do have some notes with me here. The last thing I want to do is get distracted or get off track. There's so much to talk about here, so yeah. And also, I've finally got everything linked and connected, so please feel free to check out the links in the description or my profile. You can find the first free chapter of my book there, or you can find the purchase links, whichever. But yeah, any support that you can give me as a content creator means that the more content that I can make. So yes, let's just get right into it. The death of dystopian. First of all, why does the death of dystopian matter? And this is kind of a complicated situation. So first of all, dystopian started off with publishing books, and obviously we had the whole Hunger Games phase and everything associated with that. But since then, dystopian has gone on to create a massive cultural ripple effect in the United States. If you remember, around 2013, it seemed like everything that was coming out was related to dystopian, and as a result, a lot of movies and TV shows and comic books and things that came out in that time frame were all related to dystopian. So what that means is, you have more inspiration, more jobs, more opportunities for people to be involved in this. And since the death of dystopian, obviously that has had a dramatic impact on the market, both for publishing books, movies, comic books, everything. So even though it's 70% currently a publishing issue, it has ripple effects on everything. So it's very important that we have this discussion, and that we actually try to do something about it, or at least talk about it, because these are things that could easily be changed, but they're not being changed. So now moving on, let's talk about what the early birth of dystopian. Where did dystopian actually come from? And this actually comes all the way back to Harry Potter. I know that sounds totally disconnected and really strange, but let me explain. So back in the early days of publishing, back in the 90s, there was no such thing as middle grade YA, any sort of kid literature genre. Literally nothing. People had tried to publish books for children before, aside from those actual picture books. Nothing ever really seemed to sell. And the publishing industry was primarily dominated by adult authors. It was all science fiction, fantasy, the usual epic stuff. So what that meant is when Harry Potter actually finally got published, and when the market was beginning to change, it blew up so rapidly and so quickly that the publishers themselves weren't even expecting for this to happen. So then suddenly everyone was looking for their YA or their middle grade or their, young adult novel. They needed something to fill the shelves because out of nowhere, quote unquote, there was this demand for young fiction for kids and for teenagers. So as a result, basically everything was getting sucked in to this youth category, and that is where it led us to Twilight. Twilight was the next big craze after Harry Potter. I'm pretty sure everyone either knows about Twilight or has read Twilight or has at least seen the movie, or Twilight was a very opinionated part of American culture, and for good reasons, because first of all, the novels are questionable, but also they pushed that gap. They were filling everything, and they were proving to publishers that yes, you can make a lot of money off of, young adult literature. So what that means is that after Twilight happened and after Harry Potter happened, publishers were now looking around trying to figure out what's going to be the next biggest craze. What can we publish? What can we produce that will fill that gap and make us a bunch of money? And if you figured out where this is going, you're entirely right. It's the Hunger Games. So in 2009, the Hunger Games released, and it became a global phenomenon. Literally a global phenomenon. Not only did all of the movies get made and were produced with high quality, but yeah, literally every single culture seemed to have some sort of Hunger Games moment. I remember I personally even had like a little Hunger Games pin that I would wear on, like I went as Katniss Everdeen one year for a Halloween costume, and I had the actual Hunger Games pin. So like this was affecting everyone. Everyone knew about the Hunger Games and everybody wanted to be involved in the Hunger Games. And as a result, we hit that next cultural evolution. And dystopian became everything. Literally everything. So I have some facts listed here in my little notebook. I'm just going to read off a few of them. So after The Hunger Games was published in 2010, The Walking Dead aired and became a massive hit. Then shortly after that, The Last of Us was published. The video game was published in 2013. And then you also had movies like World War Z, which were also published in 2013. So yeah, we had this massive, almost overnight cultural revolution where everyone wanted to get a slice of that dystopian cake. They were like, that is awesome, it's selling so well, you know, think about all the movies and the comic books and the TV shows that we can make from this. And as a result, the publishing industry picked up almost every single dystopian draft that was sent to them, which is amazing, but also consequential because it led to 2013. So 2013 was the peak of dystopian. It seemed like half of the books that came out that year were either dystopian related or were just straight up dystopian, along with like the movies and the games and the TV shows that I just mentioned. But right after 2013 and right after everyone was just getting high on this dystopian craze that was going on, everyone immediately felt the impacts of the dystopian fall. And boy, was that rough. So let's just get right into it. Okay, so immediately from about the end of 2013 on, sales in the publishing industry began to fall. And this was significant because of three reasons. So first of all, simplicity. So around the same time as that, Divergent, the book, was finally published. And if you want to hear more about that, there are tons of YouTube videos which go in depth analyzing how Divergent basically single-handedly nuked the entire dystopian genre. But what it comes down to is it comes down to simplicity. So Divergent took all of the dystopian tropes that we love and that we know. For example, that strong female lead that goes against the government, the fact that she's doing it because she wants to protect her family, the fact that she accidentally or stumbles into some sort of love or some sort of love triangle. So yeah, it takes almost every single dystopian trope that had been published at the time, and it just smushed them all together. And as a result, the publishing industry began to look like one continuous, it's like one of those mass-produced shirts where you see them in every single color, but they're the exact same style. Yeah, that's basically what Divergent did to the dystopian industry. You know, same ice cream, different flavor. And that just wasn't, people didn't realize it at the time how much damage that would cause, but yeah, that single-handedly probably led to the destruction of the dystopian industry. But there are still two more reasons why that also did not help. And number two is oversaturation. So as you can imagine, like I just said, they produced so many books and them all being the same sort of theme, same sort of content, that it oversaturated the market. So every single, like I said, it seemed like half the books that were coming out that year were all about dystopian. And it seemed like every single one of them was the exact same book, just told a little bit differently. And on top of that, not only did the publishing industry oversaturate the market, it then refused to adapt from that market. So normally when you have this huge publishing craze going on, there's some sort of turning page where something turns out differently or heads in a new direction. Previously, as it did with, Harry Potter and Twilight, that's kind of like the turning point for that era. But Dystopian didn't have that because the publishing industry didn't really allow for that. So what was happening was all these people were being accepted and every single book was being published, and as a result, all of the turning points that could have existed were essentially drowned under the overwhelming amount of dystopian. And when you can't have that turning point, what happens? The door closes. And this is probably honestly, I feel like it's the dumbest thing that the publishing industry has ever done. But it is one of the most significant and extreme reactions that the publishing industry has ever had to anything. And what I mean is, so after we all get past this, everything has kind of reached its peak and its climax, and now we're heading into the downfall. Instead of gracefully just tapering off and letting things die like they need to, the dystopian industry essentially slammed the door. So as soon as sales began to fall and as soon as everything went to as soon as everything went down, they basically said no more. We're not taking any more manuscripts. We're not accepting any new authors. Unless you have your foot in the door already, we're done. And even some authors who were having their books published never actually got to finish their book series. It was just like such a 180. Everything just automatically, immediately changed. It was really extreme and very emotional because not only did they close the door at that moment, but they've never really reopened the door. So what has happened in the last few years is anytime there's an author who wants to publish a dystopian book, here's the process that they have to follow. First, they write that whole book, they get everything done, they get all the edits done that they need to, and then they take that to an agent. And the agent reads over that book and goes, well, this is amazing, I actually really like this book, but we should explain that the publishing industry isn't accepting any dystopian novels. So I can't be your agent, even though you wrote this really amazing book. Or, if they manage to somehow convince said agent to take their book, what ends up happening is that agent then tries to take that to the publishing house. And the publishing house has a very similar reaction. Oh, well, great book, we really like you as an author, but not gonna happen. Or, it puts that book through and it gets published. And this is where the kicker comes in. The publishing industry, for the past 2 decades or so, has switched to a sort of gladiator survival of the fittest model, in which unless you were already a huge author making that publishing industry like tons and tons of money, you're not going to be able to get to you're not going to get the resources that you need to publish your book and to do well. So all of the marketing, all of the cover design, all of the everything, like monetary, financial wise, instead of giving that dystopian book a fair chance, it goes to some author that already is super big, already has their name everywhere, or to some other thing. And it kind of turns into that surprised Pikachu meme where it's like, publishing industry doesn't do anything to support their authors, then is surprised why their authors don't sell. But what this turns into is because their books then don't sell, they then go back to the author and go, well, gee, gosh darn, that book didn't sell, told you it wouldn't, that sucks for you, goodbye. And that literally happens to almost every single dystopian book. So not only do these books, like, on and off chance finally get published, they never actually are given the chances to succeed. They're pitted against, books that are way bigger than them, or series that are way bigger than them, and they're kind of just left to drown. And there's nothing the author can do about that. There's nothing the readers can do about that, unless, suddenly we turn everything around and we're buying the book. Like, it's mostly a publishing industry problem. But the publishing industry is so thoroughly convinced that, Dystopian isn't going to sell and that it's not going to do well because of that whole rise and fall of the dystopian craze back in 2013, that it just gives up. It doesn't even care about dystopian anymore. So as a result, think about all the times recently that you've heard of or even seen dystopian. Aside from the second Last of Us game, I'm betting that you probably haven't heard of it at all recently. And that's because of this whole publishing problem. Publishers have just straight up, in a roundabout way, censored altogether dystopian, and they've killed it. So at that point, when the publishing industry refuses to adapt, and it's oversaturated the market, and it's simplified everything, where do you go? Because if the books right now aren't getting attention, and they're not getting support, what does the future look like for dystopian? And the question is, the answer to this question is super complex. So first of all, there is a potential route for dystopian in this current market without changing anything. But it requires taking a different approach to what we know as dystopian. So when you think about dystopian now, you think about probably two things. You think about The Walking Dead and The Last of Us, which are actually still successful franchises making lots of money off of dystopian. And what do these franchises do? Well, they don't do what dystopian would have done years ago. And that is, they don't focus on the plot anymore. These franchises have been around so long, or have been removed so far from dystopian, that instead of focusing on the plot or the political issues like they used to be in Hunger Games, they now focus on the characters and the relationships between people. Perhaps one of the best illustrations that I have of this is the Michael Biehn quote from The Terminator. So if you've never watched The Terminator or the Terminator series at all, I would highly recommend that you watch them, because first of all, they're classics. I seriously love them. But there was an interview done with Michael Biehn, who was the lead male character, Kyle Reese. And basically what he said is what dystopian needs to do. And he said, I got all these questions about why Terminator was so great, why people really liked it, what made Terminator different, was it a science fiction story, was it a romance story, what was it? And he said, what makes Terminator great is not the fact that there's robots, or that there's science fiction, or that there's anything going on. It's the fact that it's a love story. And this quote is very important because it shows where we need to refocus our priorities. So instead of having our priorities be based on, there's this teenage girl that's going to overthrow the government, and she's got to do it through this method and this method, or it's this political commentary that we're talking about anti-slavery or anti-capitalism or anti-communism. So instead of going those routes, which we have been for a very long time, we need to start looking more at the actual character relationship that goes between the plot and the world and all the interactions that are made in that. And that is awesome. But you already I imagine that you can already tell that that's probably not going to happen. Just by looking at the traditional publishing methods right now, it seems like most authors are only getting a standalone novel, and at most maybe 3 books in their series. So as you can imagine, that's probably very unlikely. But it is an option that we would be able to have at the moment if we explored it. Then again, there's also this possibility. So pretending that we are entirely ignoring the traditional publishing industry and everything that has been going on over there, there is a way for dystopians to make a comeback. And that's what it would need to be. It would need to be a comeback. And that is through self-publishing. At the moment, self-publishing is not very popular among dystopian authors. I myself am a self-published dystopian author, and I've heard of very few of us. And that's because self-publishing is currently trying to follow traditional publishing market trends. But if somehow, some way, we were able to break away from that and once again refocus our attention back to a character and making character our primary objective for our novels, there definitely could be a rise of dystopian in the future. And again, with that rise would come more jobs, more movies, more series, more creative everything. So it is very much within our best interest to make this happen. But as I said, like, it's a what if. Ultimately, what it comes down to is there needs to be some sort of cultural revolution, some sort of cultural renaissance regarding dystopian. At the moment, we're just treating it like it's dead and we're ignoring it and like it's not actually important. But the fact is, think about all of the times that you've gone back and you've reread books or you've reread series or you've talked to friends about something, and if you think about all those times, I guarantee you there's been at least one time where you've engaged with dystopian and it has become a fundamental part of either your childhood or your early teenage years. Simply put, dystopian is nostalgic and we love it. We want more of it. But we can't have it the way that it currently was because it's just broken. The whole system from back then was broken. So either we have to rebuild the system or we have to accept something new. And we can't go back to political reasons because honestly, imagine trying to publish a book in a very political climate like today where everyone's so angry about presidential elections or politics or voting or whatever. Imagine trying to publish a book today and you're talking about that same stuff that we were back then, overthrowing the government, diseases. How do you think that would settle in our current modern climate? I don't think that those books would even be of interest to most people because we're already so burned out on anti-this, anti-that, and COVID everywhere. So really, we need to just take a step back, rethink about what dystopian means to us and how we want to reapproach this, because it doesn't have to be dead. Dystopian doesn't have to stay the way that it is, but it will unless we as content creators and we as readers and viewers, unless we do something, unless we speak up and say, you know what, we want this content, but we need it a different way. So yeah, that is pretty much all I have to say on that topic. I already know that a lot of people are probably gonna be like, well, it's not that big of a deal, or well, it is what it is. But yeah, this has been such an impact to me as a dystopian author, so I just felt like I needed to share my frustrations and my experiences with the publishing industry and everything else. So yeah, if you want to support me as an author, read the first free chapter of my book, go ahead and check out those links in my profile. Also, if you want to check out my YouTube channel, I leave special dystopian content on there all the time. I just uploaded a speed drawing of my dystopian world right there. So yes, all very interesting, lots of fun. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. You guys are awesome. But yeah, I will talk to you guys later. Bye!